In October, the International Air Transport Association downgraded its Africa travel forecast for 2020 to reflect plummeting traffic due to the coronavirus pandemic. According to IATA, the continent is expected to hit 30% of 2019 passenger levels, which is significantly lower from the 45% projected in July. That means Africa will see just 45 million travelers this year compared to 155 million in 2019. But is it all doom and gloom? Let's see how this is affecting tourism, not just in Africa, but globally. Matt Kinniger, Associate Practice Lead for Sub-Saharan Africa at Frontier View, joins me now. Hello, Matt. Good afternoon. Good to see you again.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me on the show today.
The COVID-19 pandemic has decimated demand for air travel in Africa, this year. Will African airlines be able to survive and capitalize on the anticipated recovery in air travel next year, even despite this new strain of COVID-19?
Yes, well, it's a good question to ask because it's a very fast-moving situation globally. But in the short term, really, the good news is that we expect the African governments to support some of the major flag carriers globally, especially the big countries like Ethiopia, Kenya, South Africa. I would be very surprised if governments allowed those airlines to collapse because of the coronavirus pandemic. So next year, we will see the major players remain in place, is our expectation. But next year is going to be very tough in terms of competition for African carriers, especially these big ones. So assuming we do see improved travel connections next year, especially with Europe and the Middle East, big European, Middle Eastern airlines are likely to slash their prices to try to attract travelers back to air travel. And so it's going to be a pretty tough year for African carriers next year. So competition is likely to heat up and is going to be a lot less friendlier in terms of the competitive landscape in 2021.
Now, looking beyond 2021, what are the longer term trends shaping the future of the aviation industry in Africa?
So it generally is quite a positive outlook for aviation in Africa in the longer term. And I would say this is for a number of reasons. One is that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement explicitly looks to liberalize air travel between member states of the African Union. And we are already seeing countries sign bilateral agreements to liberalize their airspace based on African Union free trade agreement principles. A good example is between Mozambique and Zimbabwe. So we are seeing more liberalization domestically as well. Countries are liberalizing airspace. Mozambique is a good example again. They have seen prices fall and choice improve as a result of the ending of the monopoly of the domestic carrier, of the national carrier LAM. And we've also seen the rise of low-cost carriers, and this will only accelerate once things get closer back to normal when the coronavirus recedes. And we're also seeing pretty resilient growth, or we had seen resilient growth amongst super connectors like Ethiopian Airlines that has invested in other regional carriers in Malawi and Togo. So really, the story is quite a positive one in the longer term. We expect African air travel to bounce back over the next few years quite resiliently.
Now, the aviation industry is closely linked to the global tourism industry, which has suffered heavily this year. When do you see a recovery in global tourism emerging, and to what extent will domestic African tourism make up for the loss of international tourist arrivals?
So the story, or the outlook for global tourism is probably a little bit less rosy than the outlook for African airlines. We don't expect the global demand for tourism to return to pre-pandemic levels until 2023 or 2024. And so this means in 2021, we are expecting global tourism, including in Africa, to remain at about 50% of the level it was recorded in 2019. So it's going to take a good few years before global tourism recovers. And this obviously will have an effect on the aviation industry. In terms of domestic tourism, to an extent, yes, it will compensate for weak global arrivals. So in South Africa, we have seen a bit of an uptick in domestic tourist accommodation revenues over the last quarter, and this has been driven entirely by domestic tourists. But there's no real substitute for the very high-spending European, North American tourists who go to countries like Mozambique, Kenya, South Africa. So the tourism industry will probably suffer for at least the next 12 months until a global vaccine is rolled out on a meaningful scale.
Well, Matt, I'm not going to see you again before Christmas. So Merry Christmas to you and your family. Be well.
And to you too as well.
Stay safe.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.